Before us, it was them.
Before us, politics belonged to the few.
Before us, true representation was out of reach.
But today, it is us. Taking the lead, changing the game, and winning.
Today, we celebrate groundbreakers, history makers, icons, the greats.
Our candidates are not just brilliant, tested, and ready to lead. They hold a breadth of lived experience that will take our country in a new direction. Emily's List has helped elect more than 1,500 exceptional women to all levels of government. And we plan to do even more to bring this kind of talent to the state and local governments across the country by flipping chambers, winning historic governorships, nurturing talent from City Hall to Congress and all the way to the White House.
And that is why today we look to the future that lies before us.
Before us, we see equity. Before us is hope.
Before us is a fairer, better world that only we can build.
Paid for by Emily's List, emilyslist.org, and not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Breaking Barriers for Black Women in Electoral Politics panel hosted by Emily's List. I'm Tanya Williams, Director of Strategic Communications at Emily's List, and we are the nation's largest resource for women in politics. With a grassroots community of over 5 million members, Emily's List helps to elect Democratic pro-choice women up and down the ballot and across the country. Since our founding in 1985, we have helped elect the country's first woman vice president, 158 women to the House, 28 women to the Senate, 16 governors, and more than 1,300 women in state and local offices across the country. More than 40% of the candidates Emily's List endorsed for Congress are women of color. During this panel, you will hear from a few phenomenal Black women leaders as they discuss how we can leverage the power and the influence of our communities to increase representation of Black women in elected office. Before our discussion, we will hear from Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, who represents Illinois' 14th District.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, and I represent Illinois' 14th Congressional District. 4 years ago, I launched my campaign for Congress for a simple reason. My then congressman ignored his constituents and cast a vote to make healthcare unaffordable for people with pre-existing conditions, people like me and so many others around our country. And as someone who spent years implementing the Affordable Care Act, I couldn't sit on the sideline while people's right to healthcare was being threatened. So I decided to do something about it and run for office. I was elected to Congress in 2018, and I was sworn into the House of Representatives in January of 2019. At 32, I became the youngest Black woman to ever serve as a member of Congress. And let me tell you, I don't take that lightly, and it's a responsibility I carry with me every day. Black women are the backbone of our democracy, and I am not going to let them down. I don't need to tell you that the average member of Congress doesn't look like the average American. There's a gap between what Congress thinks is important and what we do. Our lived experiences are fundamentally different. I truly believe that more reflective representation in Congress means better policy outcomes for our people. With younger voices, more women, more people of color, and more LGBTQ folks at the table, we can make a lot more progress for our country. The good news is that the movement is already happening, and I am honored to be a part of it. We must empower a new generation of leaders to get involved in the movement too. I'll be the first one to tell you that it may not be easy, but it will be worth it. I've learned a lot over the past few years, much of which isn't necessarily political. The work is about persistence. Government isn't always the most well-oiled machine, so you have to be willing to fight hard time and time again for what you know is right. I know that Black folks have big ideas, big dreams, and big hopes that we talk ourselves out of too often. We tell ourselves that we can't do it. I know I've done that myself. I want young people of color to know what's possible, that they can and should step up when a challenge presents itself, even if it seems insurmountable. Because it's not. I'm proof of that. It is absolutely worth it to put everything on the line to fight for what we know is right. Our families, friends, and neighbors deserve a representative who shows up for them every day in a transparent and accountable way, which means we need to keep working until our Congress looks like our America. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you all, and I hope you enjoy the panel discussion.
Thank you, Congresswoman Underwood, for encouraging us to step up to the challenge when it presents itself. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Karen Finney, who will lead today's discussion. Karen is a CNN commentator, consultant, and thought leader who has worked at the intersection of media, politics, and cultural change for more than 30 years. Her political work predominantly focuses on electing women and candidates of color, including Hillary Clinton, Stacey Abrams, and examining support for Black women's political leadership. Attitudes about racism, criminal justice, and policing reform, and mobilizing infrequent Black and brown voters also falls under her expertise. In addition to her consulting work, she currently hosts Represent Your Voice on TV One and previously hosted Disrupt with Karen Finney on MSNBC. She also writes frequently about race, gender, and politics. Welcome, Karen. I'm so excited for this panel discussion today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Tanya, and thanks everyone for being with us today for this very timely conversation, breaking the barriers for Black women in electoral politics. You know, in recent years, we've all seen calls to celebrate and thank Black women for literally saving our democracy through activism and action. But what about our success when running for office or even running campaigns and working in campaigns? You know, although Black women have made tremendous strides politically, Black women make up 7.41% of the population, but we only represent 4.6% of state legislators. So we got a lot of work to do. We currently have no Black women in the United States Senate, and a Black woman has never served as governor. So again, lots of work to do. Historically, Black women are underrepresented in key areas of our politics and our political campaigns. So I'm really thrilled to join you to have this conversation. Today, I'm joined by two phenomenal women who have worked as political insiders, activists, advocates for many years. Joining us, Angelique Cannon. Angelique is the Vice President of Development at Emily's List, the nation's largest resource for women in politics. Now, prior to that, she served as National Finance Director for Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Welcome. We're also joined by the wonderful Jessica Knight-Henry. Jessica serves currently as the Deputy Executive Director of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. And this is after serving as the Political Engagement Director during the 2020 cycle. So we're very lucky to have these two women joining us. Thanks to you both. So one thing I think it's important to do is let's start by talking a little bit about how we all got started in politics, because as we know, we're a lot of times, I think you'll agree, have been maybe the only Black woman in some of these spaces, or one of just a couple in some of these spaces. So Angelique, I'm going to start with you and just ask you a little bit more about, how you got interested in politics, political engagement, and sort of what your journey was like.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm so happy to be on this panel with you and Jessica. Mine actually started when I was 8 years old, and I'm from Augusta, Georgia. And my uncle was running a political campaign for a guy who turned out to be the first Black mayor of Augusta. And it was, I won't say the date, but it's like late 70s. And I was 8 years old. And I made sandwiches for an event at a senior citizens activity community center. And my mom was there, and I thought that was like the best thing I had ever done. I watched this man as he engaged people, as they got excited about the prospect of having this first Black mayor. And I thought, oh, this is really amazing. And then, from then on, I worked and volunteered for like Bill Clinton's campaign in Georgia when he ran the first time. And then I moved to Washington area, and I went to Howard University. And I, at that point, did a paid internship at Women's Campaign Fund, and then just continued to go through there from doing development, went to fundraising, and ended up at this spot with Emily's List and obviously with the vice president. And so I would like to say that it started at a very young age, and my family was an important part of like my political engagement. And I think that happens a lot with a lot of people, but I got the bug pretty early in life, and I just kept going with it.
And were there people who kind of, in addition to your family members and perhaps the people that you were inspired to work for and with, were there people who kind of helped make sure some of those doors were open, or that you had the opportunity to be in some of these spaces that, again, we don't always see a lot of folks who look like us?
I mean, absolutely. I don't even know if a lot of these women probably even they did so much and they probably didn't even realize, but it is like, Mignon Moore was one of those people that I was coming of age at that time, and like Bill Clinton, and I would look at these women and they were very helpful. They would talk to you about what you wanted to do with your career, what you wanted to do next. And so it was a sisterhood, I think, that's also really important. And so it was women like that. So I would just, you can think about those women who like were very helpful in the mid to early 90s. And so they were.
Girl, we don't have to say the timeline. We don't have to say when or what.
I thought about it. I was like, do I really want to keep going with the timelines?
No, you do not.
But even watching you, it's just been really important to see women, doing a lot of what I want to do and a lot of what I admire. And it really, I just keep clawing away at it because of all of you.
Well, thank you. Jessica, talk to us about your personal journey. What got you inspired? What got you interested? And how did you make your way to where you are now?
Absolutely. And thanks again. I'm so excited to be here with you all. A lot of my sheroes are on this call, and excited to be here to share my story. Very similarly to Angelique, I grew up in South Mississippi and was around a lot of women that were doers and shakers. I come from a family of firsts. My grandmother was one of the first Black women to serve on the school board in my hometown of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And it was through her engagement in public service that, I got a front row seat to what that looked like. My mom and my grandmother, they were always poll watchers every election. I was bored sitting at high school gyms, waiting for the polls to close because my mom was a single parent. And so I got dragged to every one of those things. And so I got to see all of that. And I think just being from the South, it meant so much being from Mississippi and what people had sacrificed. And so that was always ingrained in who I was. And so I always had probably a weird interest in politics as a kid. I remember watching Meet the Press like every Sunday before DVR was a thing, would sort of pop in a VHS and record it to come home to watch Tim Russert. That was like a thing that I did. And so I was really fortunate for my community. Additionally, I benefited from a program called Girls State and Girls Nation, run by the American Legion Auxiliary. And when I was a junior in high school, I got to come to DC and participate and see how our government worked. And that was it. It was signed, sealed, and delivered. I knew that I wanted to be in Washington. And so upon graduating, I, had the option to go to law school, but wanted to scratch that campaign itch. And a lot of folks that I'd been involved with were like, there are two races in 2005. Tim Kaine, who was running for governor in Virginia, and New Jersey with Corzine. And so Virginia felt like the lesser of two evils because I was a girl from Mississippi. And so I got my start knocking doors, doing field organizing, and then looked around and I was fortunate to have people around me that was like, what part of this is interesting and exciting? And I saw that there weren't very many Black women represented in finance. And so it was a place where I saw women at the top running things, a lot of women fundraisers having a real seat at the table. And so I took that opportunity and began doing fundraising. And so was lucky to do a number of races, worked with the Congressional Black Caucus PAC as executive director for a number of years, and also did work on issue engagement as well. Climate change is an issue that's important to me. And again, looked around and saw that there weren't that many people that looked like me in that space. And so that's what I've been led by. And I'm very fortunate to be in a position in my current role that helps gives purview into that as well, as we look to hopefully expand the Senate with more Black women.
Yes. Something that I heard you both say, I'm not going to give my whole story because I've been around too long, even though we're not talking timeline. But what I will say in my first campaign also was Bill Clinton's campaign, actually, Angelique. I was volunteering. I was supposed to go to law school. I deferred law school to work on the campaign. And it was a Black woman, Maggie Williams, who was Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, who really gave me a chance. And I will say that as a young woman working for Hillary, in our office, it was diverse, but it was all women. And I didn't fully appreciate then the way I do now, what a gift it was so early in my career to be surrounded by strong women leaders, and what that meant for just also being raised by a strong mom who was a labor negotiator. My father was a civil rights lawyer, so I was probably always going to be in politics one way or the other. And have a lot of strong women in my family, but to have that early, I think what I hear all of us saying, to have those moments throughout our career where we had to think a couple of things. One, somebody who was there to mentor us and help us think through what those next steps might be, maybe help us get to those next steps, but also to be able to, even if we might have been the only in some of these rooms, to see other women doing things in roles that were important, that maybe we felt like, wow, I want to do that. I aspire to that. And I say that just because I think, and we talk about this so much when we talk about electing women, and particularly Black women, and certainly when we think about Black women in campaigns, part of the half of the battle is being able to see it, to believe it. It's so important to be able to see that and have that experience. And obviously mentorship is so important. So let's take a little pivot here. So shifting gears a little bit, for many years, the way that Black women have really shown up in campaigns has been organizing. We know that, right? And we still do. By the way, let's be real clear. We would not have the majority in the Senate, the White House, the House, without Black women's organizing. I just feel like I have to say that. But, as your personal stories also show us, there are other ways that Black women show up in the political realm. I'm thinking also of Donna Brazile, first, and to date, I'm fairly certain, only Black woman to run a presidential campaign for the party's candidate. So I'm curious to think about if we could just take a moment to talk about how Black women can utilize our skills to work on campaigns and even run for office. Jessica, I'm going to come to you first because you mentioned how you kind of saw that in the fundraising space, hey, there's an opportunity there, there's a gap there. Let me go there. And it's such an important point because there have not traditionally been as many Black folks in fundraising. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about or give some advice, because from both of you, how do we make that pivot from maybe an organizing role to finance, being the political person, being the comms person, to some of these other key roles in campaigns? And Jessica, I'll start with you.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was a field organizer on my very first campaign and loved knocking doors. I met my husband on that campaign, knocking doors. So it's a optional fairy tale for some people. But at the same time, I didn't want to be limited by that. And so I was very fortunate to have people around that say, well, what interests you here on this campaign? And so my advice would be to someone who maybe is getting their start, to look around and really sort of jot down what your interests are. Like maybe you aspire to do communications and maybe that's not your first job, or you come in as a staff assistant somewhere. But like take those opportunities, ask people in those roles to do lunch and learns, reach out, do your research on what those roles entails. I mean, on campaigns, people are constantly drinking from the fire hose. So if you have, any extra time and can be helpful and supportive, just to volunteer and raise your hand to take on more tasks, just so you can diversify what that looks like. I've been fortunate to kind of pop in and out of political spaces and finance spaces. And it's one of those things where you can be strategic in any of those roles. And at a certain point, when you're a little bit long in the tooth, as my grandmother would say, like that strategy becomes important because you need that at the top. And whether that's in like a senior advisor role or to even manage a campaign. But a lot of it is just really raising your hand and making yourself available. I think for a lot of people looking for a more strategic option, midterm elections are a really good time because there's so many campaigns and a real opportunity to, get your start on maybe a congressional that's, an opportunity that's not there in on cycle of presidential or something. So there are many, many opportunities. And if folks are looking, now's the time because a lot of campaigns are hiring. So.
Well, and Jessica knows a thing or two about that. It's such an important point though, because I'll just, mention, for me, Angelique, early in my career, I literally said, look, I want to do press. I've never done press. I'll do anything to learn, help me learn. And, sometimes a lot of it, as Jessica was just saying, is about being ready, willing, and able. It's one of the things I love about campaigns, frankly, is it's like a battleground promotion, right? If you show you're willing to work hard and you're gonna, learn, do everything you can to learn and grow, well, then people want to invest in you. So I'm wondering, Angelique, what advice you have about how, particularly for Black women who want to make that transition into, or even just get into some of these other areas of political campaigns so that we're building the pipeline. Because I'll tell you the phrase that I really am sick of is, we couldn't find anyone. Don't want to hear that anymore.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And before I get that, I just want to say, I thought it was interesting that the two of you had deferred law school, because what I didn't say in my story is I took the LSAT and then I went over to the DNC because I was like, oh, my scores are good for 5 years. I will, I'm just going to fundraise here for 1 year and I'm going to apply to law school afterwards. And here I am, never having gone to law school. So the three of us have that in common. But Jessica is actually like really right about what she said. And I would just further saying, even if you do one campaign and you did it in if you did field, then I would look at another campaign and then maybe look at doing comms on that race or look at doing finance. I mean, I would absolutely always push for people to do finance, because I find that finance, you have to know every aspect of the campaign, because you are talking to donors and you are trying to get people to support your candidate, which means you have to know everything about the candidate. Like you have to, it's the comms program, it's the political piece of this. But I would just say to people that don't be so wedded when you get into it the first time. Just do something different the next time. And also try working on some of these state and local races too, because I find they're small enough campaigns where, like Jessica said, you're able to do multiple things because they don't have these big programs. And so you're able to, maybe do field and comms, or do field and finance. And so it gives you an opportunity to like really test the waters before you start doing other campaigns and going on to like, larger campaigns. So I totally wholeheartedly agree with everything she said. And I just felt like I knew that finance is where I wanted to be. And obviously I gave a little glimpse into my age. We all know that there were not a lot of women, first of all, and certainly not women of color in finance. And I just focused in on that. And I was like, I'm going to be the best fundraiser that I can. I'm going to work really hard at this. And I think that I think that is something that, everyone should sort of look at and try and figure out how they want to do. But I agree. I say put your toe in a lot of different water and a lot of different spaces so that you come out of this a really whole person and you're doing a lot on different campaigns.
Yeah. Okay. Let's have some real talk here, guys. We know there's not that we haven't been, but really real. There are barriers. There's a reason that we have all found ourselves in places and spaces where we're either the only or one of the few women. I'll say women, and then women of color in particular, right? And, it took me, some of what those, there are a lot of different barriers, right? Sometimes it is, let's be honest, stereotypes about what we're good at, what we can be good at. And sometimes it can be a real challenge getting people to see you in a different way. I love what you said, Angelique, about trying different roles in different campaigns, because again, then you go back to it. Maybe you go back to working for somebody that you worked for and you've got, I always tell young people, it's more tools in your toolkit, right? You can say, well, I've done this job and I've done this job, to get them to see you a little bit differently. And I'm just saying, real talk, sometimes that's what we have to do. So I wonder, let's talk a little bit more about some of these other challenges or barriers that we have. And Angelique, I'm going to start with you on, from your professional perspective, how do we overcome some of these barriers? And I wonder if you've got, if there is a story or an example in your own life that you would feel comfortable sharing. Sometimes it can be financial support. As I mentioned, sometimes it can be stereotypes. I mean, certainly as women earlier on in my career, there were ways people didn't think women could handle managing a campaign or managing a large organization. And that's ironic. And certainly Emily's list has been on the forefront of helping voters understand that actually as collaborative leaders, that's exactly who you want running things. But so Angelique, I'm going to come to you and just get your thoughts on that, on some of these barriers and challenges.
It's interesting that you mentioned one of them being as an example, financial support. And I will say that with Women's Campaign Fund, it was an internship. It was a paid internship that I had. And notice I said paid, because it did allow me the opportunity to start working in the development and fundraising field at this organization, which at that time was supporting nonpartisan or bipartisan women for choice. Like that was the main thing. You had to be pro-choice. But back in that time, you had across the aisle, there were women who were pro-choice at that time, and it was a paid internship. So it allowed me the opportunity, along with like a part-time job, but it allowed me the opportunity to actually, go in and learn the field and see if this is something that I wanted to do. And a lot of times, especially in college, people of color may not have that opportunity. They can't take that. They just can't go for like an unpaid internship, that a lot of people can, like to go in someone's office or to go to the DNC. So this was one of those barriers that I was able to get through because it was a program that offered it, which I could actually take advantage of, because I did need the work while I was in school. I'll be honest about that. I needed to work while I was in school, and this allowed me the opportunity to do so. But moving forward, I just say with my barriers, I've always just tried to remain really focused on the goal that I was setting for myself and what I wanted to do, whether it was for a candidate or whether it's a committee or whether it's an organization. And I really was determined from a very young age, from getting started, that I was going to be the best fundraiser that I could be. And that there wasn't going to be anyone. I was going to outwork people if I had to. I was going to stay later if I had to do that. And so, that was just sort of how I dealt with some of those other barriers. But I will say the financial one is real. And I'd love to see us do more. We can help young people get into the field, whether it's finance or comms or whatever, but get into the political field, get into these campaigns. But a lot of times it is financial. So if there's ways that we can do that to help young people, I think it would be great.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I know for me, I happened to be lucky enough to have, there was like a couple months where I could put everything in storage, defer law school. And the deal I cut with my father was, he said, what if Bill Clinton doesn't win? I was like, then I promise you I will get a job and I will go to law school. And thankfully he won and I got a job. And it was only for a couple of months that I was sort of running around the country working on the campaign. But Jessica, curious also from your perspective, again, as we navigate these spaces, but also slightly different take on this, building political power, right? Because part of what we're trying to do is not just to get ourselves the skills and deal with the sort of challenges to get ourselves in the door to these campaigns, work our way up, but to really build political power and to be seen and heard as Black women, not just as great organizers and critical to electoral victories, but as leaders. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. And I guess I would also mention that I think, personally, Black women, we've always been leaders in movements. We just haven't always gotten the credit that we deserve, but it feels like we're starting to get a little bit more of the political credit we deserve. And I wonder if you agree with that.
I do. I mean, it's certainly been a long time coming as far as like people realizing the power that we have. And it's something, there's like the adage, like you're closer to the pain, and as Black women, like being that close to the pain. And if we succeed, then we lift others automatically because we are so close to that pain. And I think there's something that's been very phenomenal over the last few cycles of turning that pain into power and just really like utilizing our network. You've seen a number of grassroots efforts come together to say, like, win with Black women, like we have this power, we own this. And that there's also power in your individual networks. Like I am not an island. I think making sure that lifting others. Angelique mentioned those who have come and mentored us and have been very critical to our success in opening the path. And just even having that group chat, right? So you can vent and get it out because it's not an opportunity to do it in those rooms, and to know that people recognize what you're sacrificing, being the only one with a seat at that table, and how taxing that can truly be. But it's also from the grassroots, like we've seen just them demanding. And it's something I've been very proud of, like the younger generation. Like they're not really, stepping back and waiting their turn. They're not, about some of the respectability politics. And that's great because it's really given a platform to some of that messaging. But it is going to take folks who are in the institutions, right? It's like an inside out strategy and making sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned, because what we know is at stake is just too important to leave anything to chance.
Yeah, such a great point. And it's such a great point about, I did some polling research during the 2020 cycle, looking at Black women's leadership, and voters we are starting to see really agree that the lived experience we bring to the table sees a lot more, both as Black women and as women. That is a value that voters believe that is a value to have at the key decision-making tables, because they know we're going to see you, we hear you, we're going to be on top of some of these issues when we get there. And obviously, Angelique, I think a key, building on what Jessica said, I think a key piece of that too is having each other's back. And so one thing I want to talk about is, we're in this moment where we just saw, historic election turnout. Right? Black women, Black people, white people, all of us, we did. We showed up, we voted in the middle of a pandemic in record numbers, and yet we're now seeing record backlash in measures being passed across states. Obviously, there's a conversation happening in Congress about this as well. But really, let's keep it at the organizing level. How do we keep that momentum that Jessica was talking about, like with our young people, with our own networks in this moment when we're also, I mean, for me, it got me more fired up. But how do we keep the momentum when there are things pulling against us, and when we want to try to lift more women to be in more positions with political power, particularly in key jobs and elections?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I would say one thing, we still need to celebrate our small victories, because it's so easy to get bogged down in losing momentum or something didn't happen. So first of all, we need to continue to celebrate every small victory that we get, because that keeps us going. And then I think possibly what we, maybe kind of looking at our list of our goals and kind of reordering that list, how do we go about reaching that goal? And that may mean, okay, if this hasn't worked this way, we may need to look at doing it another way. We may need to look at bringing other people in. We may need to look at other allies. So I do think celebrating small victories and looking at that list again and reordering it and taking a step back and talking about what's a different way about going about reaching that goal. And I think that will keep people, that will keep us going from now until when we get to where it is that we want to be, and we reach those goals and we're successful. But again, celebrate every, no matter how large, how big the victory is, we need to celebrate them all, because that is part of what keeps us going. And frankly, it's really necessary, and we all need to pat ourselves on the back. So I think that is a good start there. But
yeah, Jessica, did you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I think the accountability too. I think that we saw this energy. We know what it took to flip the Senate. But folks need to see that there's, actual effective change in their lives. And so that requires us that are at the top, in the know, and at sort of those grass tops organizing levels to make sure to fight for what we know people on the ground need and want to see, so they can say, look, I showed that I had power, like I got out, we did this thing, but what does that mean in my everyday life? And so similar to Angelique's point about those victories, it has to be celebrated, but like we have to make sure that we're still holding our elected officials and what policy is attainable, what's not, so that people can see that change in their lives, especially now when so many people are suffering.
Yeah, it's so true. So obviously, all of us do political work. That's our business. And some of us are working in organizations where we are not the majority. We've said that. Emily's List is very intentional about their work around DEI. So I guess where I want to go next with this conversation, I'll start with you, Jessica, is what is your advice for people who work to advocate for Black women, but they aren't necessarily the majority in their professional spaces? And I will just say, I think we're seeing, I really applaud the work that Emily's List is doing. I think there are a lot of organizations that are, trying to live up to this moment, where I think we are in a moment of cultural shift on a number of levels, but really trying to step up in this moment. So would love to get your thoughts, Jessica, about, for those who work to advocate for Black women, but they aren't the majority in their professional spaces.
Yeah, so I took on a role to make sure that we were thinking about DEI in the space of sort of Democratic Senate politics. And one of the things is just really breaking down some of the silos. A lot of what we do is insular by nature. You immediately recall that this person was good on X campaign, and that sort of circle exists. And so in a lot of ways, as we're, lifting up, not only equity and inclusion, there's like the justice piece of it too. And I think what you said earlier, Karen, about, having folks with those competencies and understanding those lived experiences and how to really infuse that into the work. It seems like it has become a little bit of a buzz. And so that requires, making sure that it's not like, oh, we've checked the box for our hiring policies, but what does that look like sort of more broadly, and how can we sort of bake it into sort of the bones and of what these institutions do. And so it's not something that we look at, not, okay, just in the candidates that we're recruiting, not just in the staff that we're hiring. It has to trickle down to the campaign side, on the official side. Like, it has to be so intentional. And that intentionality is really the crucial part.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Angelique, I want to get you in on this too, because I also, I think it's important as, again, when we're in that intentionality, I think we also have to, we go back to some of the barriers that we talked about, right? Recognize some of the traditional barriers and frankly, unconscious biases that folks might have when they're thinking, when you're thinking about people for different roles. Like you said, it's like the 10 that you always call, let's make that 20 and create some diversity. And I think we could all agree there's need for more of that, frankly, within our own space or the work that we do. But Angelique, would love to hear your advice for folks about how to be so intentional.
Well, I would just say when you're looking at this, and I even do this myself, is like realize that everyone doesn't have the same experience. Like, they may not have come up through campaigns, but that doesn't mean that the experience they have at an organization or be it corporate and they're trying to make it into the political world, doesn't mean that because their experience is different from ours, doesn't mean that they don't have the experience. So I do feel like we need to look at the different type of roles that people have held and what they're bringing to the table, because it's not always going to necessarily match up and mesh what we've always, we always hire the person who's done this. They have to be on this campaign. They have to have this much experience. People bring different experience to the table. And I think that that's what we should look at. And that's what we should start embracing is that when you're trying to fill these roles, realize that lived experiences that we're talking about come in different ways, and that we should not be so quick to just look for people who have campaign experience or in this shape or form, but it could come at us in different ways.
That's such a great point, because I also think for managers, I'll just say, when I've advised folks to say it literally in the questions that you are asking people in the interview, think about different ways to get at understanding how they think, not just what are the technical things they've done, the boxes that they've checked, like I've done this type of job and this type of job, but get a sense of how do they think? Because, and I think part of that too, when I've advised young people, is being able to tell our own stories when we are interviewing for jobs, so that people hear the skill sets, right? So that we make it about skill sets and not just about, as you so greatly said, Angelique, were they a field organizer? Then did they work in this campaign? Then did they work in that campaign? But maybe they have expertise, maybe just from a different type of work, I guess is the way. So I think you're right. And some of that has to do with when we're interviewing people. I also think we just have to be intentional when we're thinking about the consultants that we hire and making sure that we're putting together diverse teams. And I want to, in the time that we have left, I want to pivot a little bit, because I think this issue also is very relevant when we think about campaigns and candidates. We've seen a record number of Black women running for office. Yay. That's awesome. We still got to get a Black woman in the Senate. We still got to get a Black woman governor. Not saying anything about any specific campaigns, of course, but just the idea that, those are levels of spheres of power and influence we want to break into. And so, Jessica, I'm going to start with you, because, one of the things that I've seen on campaigns is that there have been times where we have women of color, Black women, who are the candidates, but their teams don't always reflect the diversity of the candidate, or sometimes even the place where they're working. How do we break through with that? And I know this is something that I should say both Emily's List, the DSCC, everybody is really working hard to do better and really be intentional about this.
Well, I think it goes to that pipeline that we're talking about, and sort of ticking that boxes and what experiences people have. And, if we're on the hamster wheel and we're not seeing, people of color or women in these leadership positions, when it comes time for the next cycle, we're just doing another loop to say like, oh, well, we need someone with this XYZ experience. So really breaking the mold on what that looks like, and also really empowering the candidates themselves to demand that. You know, there are so many pieces of the puzzle that folks feel like they have to do. And, you know, as a candidate, like, we need this consultant because this is the person that got this win, and this is the person that maybe has, you know, the stamp of approval. And so it's twofold. It's on us as, you know, operatives to make sure that we're demanding that freedom, and that if someone, you know, is taking a risk as a candidate, that they're not completely, you know, written off, that viability measure shifts a little bit, but also that we are also providing, you know, an actual access to that pipeline, whether it's, you know, consultants, staff, all of those pieces. So I really think that's key, but really letting people sort of sit and embrace, you know, what they look like, where they're from, to bring those people on, and giving them the freedom to do so.
Angelique, would love to get your thoughts on this as well.
Oh, I listen, I don't think there's much more to say beyond that. I wholeheartedly agree. And, you know, and if you're running, you know, when you're running for office, you want to make sure that your campaign also represents how your community looks, or how your state looks, and how diverse it is. So I do think it's also incumbent upon, you know, the candidate to sort of look at his or her campaign and just say, does this campaign reflect this district, or does this campaign reflect this state? And so, and if it doesn't, then there, you know, you need to make some changes to it.
And
Hey,
one
Angela.
point that
Yeah,
I
go for
wanted
it.
to add, Karen, was that it's not also upon candidates of color. Like, we need
Yes.
non-candidates of color to also look at the demographics of where they're from, and what their state looks like, and their districts, to make sure that they are also putting those people in place.
It's a great point. And you're right. This is how we build the pipeline. This is how we build the expertise. We all need to have opportunities. I remember early in my career on a campaign that I was working on, the person I was working for told me they did not think I would be good at speaking on the record to the press. So
now look at it, right?
Now look at it. But point being, right, and it meant that we didn't have a certain perspective that was going to be reflected in this campaign. And again, I think, as you guys have both said, it's also, we bring different things to the job and to the table, regardless of whether the candidate is Black or white or brown or AAPI, LGBTQ, you name it. Having the diversity of voices is so critical. We have just a couple of minutes left, and so I want to just talk a little bit about the unique challenges that Black women as candidates are facing. We are all people who get to see that up front, have an upfront seat to that, as in these various campaigns that we're working on, and we see, why is it that Black, what are some of those challenges, and why do we think those exist? How do we help our Black women candidates deal with some? And I'm just going to name, sometimes it's still raising money. Sometimes it's still dealing with, stereotypes about viability, right? I mean, so how do we help, as we're seeing more Black women run for office at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level? How do we help these women deal with some of those challenges? Jessica, I'm going to start with you.
Certainly. I think one is sort of protecting and pushing back when we hear those things. And that's not just for the Black women who are in this space like us, but for everyone. It's an edict to say, like, does this same descriptor apply if this were not a Black woman? The term difficult, like, it is so easy to throw it out there, and we don't hear that about men. We don't hear it, especially about white men. And it's very different, a difficult sort of moniker for a Black woman than even a white woman. And so I think, to the point about recognizing sort of these unconscious biases and what that looks like, so that we can, one, check it at the start, but also, really like going to bat and sort of defending and saying something when we hear these things happen. So that's certainly one way. I think the viability piece comes, we are traditionally, not having Black women in this space raising money, like all of those things are hard. because it's uncomfortable going to, again, people who your network may not be a high net worth network, and asking those people, and when you're saying that first pass, which are supposed to be your family and friends, and they don't look like people who can stand up a campaign, like how do you then sort of extend that out and get that stamp of approval? So.
Well, thankfully, we have a fundraiser joining us who can help us answer that question. But seriously, Angelique, that is one of the challenges that I feel like women of color, candidates of color, and women in particular, of course, Black women, thinking about, some of the fundraising is one of the key challenges. I want to pick up on that. And the second thing I would love to get your thoughts on, Angelique, too, is, I think it's important in campaigns that it's not just the Black folks in the campaign saying, hey guys, let's be careful about viability, likability, all those things that we tend to hear associated with female candidates and specifically Black women, but that we've got as part of our job, I think, is to help all of our team members, help make sure those things aren't happening.
Yeah, I mean, we really definitely have to reorient ourselves. We're on these campaigns and we're talking about Black women. I mean, and here are some of the things that, we talk about. Emily's list is for fundraising is teaching women how to fundraise and how they go to people even outside their network. Because when people say, oh, she's not going to be able to raise the money, it's not necessarily, well, is she not able to raise money, or have we taught her how to raise the money? And I think that's a lot too, because it's not something that normally, Black women come in as candidates knowing how to do. And I'm like, absolutely, we should teach, and they should toot their own horn. That's the other thing. We have to teach. I mean, I have a problem with it myself, like talking about really selling myself a lot of times, but we also have to teach Black women that it's okay. You're fierce and we should put that out there. So I think a lot of that goes hand in hand as well. With that. So that would be my added addition to this, is being able to tout our accomplishments and being very confident in what we're saying about ourselves and having our team do the same thing as well.
That's right. There was a time when folks thought that investing in Stacey Abrams racing for governor was not a good investment. I know that seems crazy now, but way back in 2018, right? It's like you got to give people a chance. You've got to believe in the candidate and their ability to see a vision for what the future could be. So I always like to end things on a positive or a hopeful note. And so, Angelique, I'm going to start with you with this question, which is twofold. I guess first, in the few minutes we have left, what gives you hope as you look at the landscape of the way things are changing and either the work that you're doing at Emily's list? What gives you hope?
I would say where I'm hopeful is, we talked about this earlier, is that there has been a shift in mindset in how we look at Black women as candidates, as current elected officials, as women who go out there and are active and vote. And so I see that there are so many more opportunities, and there is so much more openness to women as candidates, women working on campaigns. And so I'm very hopeful that we can keep that going, that this is not, a cyclical piece here, because we had a hard 4 years. And so I'm very hopeful that this will continue, because I think that we have now seized the moment, and we're not going to let go of it. So I am very hopeful that what's happened over the past year and a half will continue to go.
Jessica, what gives you hope?
I think similarly, the representation, it's been so refreshing to see, from this panel that we're doing right now to seeing, every aspect in the media, more candidates running, the fact that we are really out here and charging hard and seeing young people. I've got a 5-year-old daughter. And so everything that I do is sort of the lens of what is going to be better for her. And so thinking about all of those wins and victories that we can have, but just, seeing us, the many hues and shades has been really beautiful and very exciting.
So we've got just a couple minutes left. So I'm going to do what we like to call rapid fire speed round, if you will. Angelique, piece of advice for young Black women trying to get into this business and to tap into their own political power.
Oh my gosh. Think about where it is you want to be, see yourself there and make your plan to get there. That would be my advice.
Awesome. Jessica, advice.
Shoot your shot. I mean, similarly, like if you know what you want to do or see or get in those LinkedIn DMs, like you just never know. But make sure that you are top of mind for anyone that's doing some hiring and thinking about it. And so networking and all of those pieces.
Yeah. And I guess what I'll just add in these closing moments is recognize that we all have a network. Think about the people that you've worked with or you've worked for. And I always say to young people, if you're interviewing with someone, ask them to connect you to 3 more people, right? Because that's part of how we build our network. So you have a network, even if you don't realize that you do. So you guys, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you, Jessica Knight Henry. Thank you, Angelique Cannon. You're doing amazing work. Please keep it up. We need you. You're amazing. And thank you so much, Emily's List, for hosting this panel.
Thanks so much, Karen and Jessica.
Thanks.
To our amazing moderator and panelists, Karen Finney, Angelique Cannon, and Jessica Knight Henry, thank you for sharing your stories with us. We are inspired by your phenomenal leadership and hard work in increasing Black women's representation at all levels of government. Congresswoman Underwood, thank you for being a part of our event today. And thank you for your leadership in Congress as you continue to break barriers for Black women nationwide. And last, but certainly not least, we'd like to thank you, our wonderful audience. Thank you for your energy, your drive, and your commitment to empowering Black women in the political sphere. Stay in touch with us by texting JOIN, that's JOIN, to 47717 to find out how you can help elect more Democratic pro-choice women. Thank you for joining us and have a great afternoon.